Why you should be a psychopath. Sometimes. Did I not put that in the title? Lots of these thoughts are based on the book The Wisdom of Psychopaths, which I shall edit in here. I get the sense that future Nathan is going to screw me over in the editing process, but that's fine. The central message of the book is that psychopaths have traits that make them capable of being both the person who sets your house on fire and equally the person who would run into the burning building to save you. Traits that can be villainous or heroic, depending on the context. These traits include ruthlessness, fearlessness, charm, coolness under pressure, focus. Of course, psychopaths can be extremely damaging creatures in society and have a whole host of very undesirable traits. They represent 20% of the prison population, yet 80% of the psychopaths in prison are there because of violent crimes. Psychopaths lack conscience, for want of a better word. However, they don't have to be violent, and can even be the exact people you'd want around in a crisis. If the dials of these traits are tuned correctly, these traits can afford some very beneficial advantages. Psychopathy, like many things, is not binary. It's a spectrum on which we all fall, meaning that you can have some of these traits and develop them, without also having to take all of the bad ones on board. Anti-anxiety. Despite how I often say that previous generations, such as that of my grandparents, are in many ways tougher than modern generations, I will say that one of the worst features of modern day life is its ability to be anxiety-inducing. There is a high stress level that can kind of chip away at you in a very insidious way. Psychopaths do not suffer from this problem at all. Their condition, in some areas, is like an antidote to modern life. They are liberated from worries, from guilt, from shame, from the fear of the judgment of other people. In essence, it's like an immunity from many of the modern day problems that plague people. Just imagine it for a second, to have the burden of worry or anxiety lifted from your shoulders, basically forever. To not feel stress and be unfazed by fear. Stress, anxiety and fear are actually adaptive, by which I mean they serve a purpose for us. But I would say that a large percentage of the time, probably the majority of the time, those feelings come about for pointless reasons. As the Stoic philosopher Seneca once said, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Let's take a look at the 10 most psychopathic professions. Number 10, civil servant. Number 9, chef. Who else thought of Gordon Ramsay on a really bad day? Number 8 and number 7, clergy person and police officer. I'm shocked. Number 6, journalist. Number 5, let's come back to number 5. Number 4, salesperson. Number 3, media, television and radio. I think the extent to which that particular industry is psychopathic is still not fully appreciated. Number 2, lawyer, no surprises. And finally, number 1, CEO. Let's go back to number 5. Number 5 is surgeon. Interestingly, doctor is one of the least psychopathic professions, yet surgeon one of the most. Philosophically, if you're interested in the power over life and death, in some sense, saving someone's life is the same as taking it. They're still in your hands. It's still a godlike power. In many ways, to be a good surgeon, you need to be able to detach emotionally. And although it is part of the discipline of the profession, to be able to put your emotions aside, nonetheless, it seems obvious that that would be much easier for a psychopath than it would for a normal person. In the book, there is a quote from one of the UK's top neurosurgeons who says, "I have no compassion for those whom I operate on. That is a luxury I simply cannot afford. In the theatre, I am reborn as a cold, heartless machine, totally at one with the scalpel, drill and saw. When you're cutting loose and cheating death high above the snow line of the brain, feelings aren't fit for purpose. Emotion is entropy, and seriously bad for business. I've hunted it down to extinction over the years." Not a guy you'd want to babysit your kids, but might be the guy you want to operate on them in a life or death situation. Speaking as someone who has had life-saving surgery in the past, I don't think I'd want a surgeon walking in who's had a really stressful day, who feels slightly off, or has some personal issue that is emotionally distracting. It does very much seem to be the case that we choose different people for peacetime and wartime. There are moments where everything is on the line, and counterintuitively, you want the person to care and be deeply emotionally invested in the outcome. But so often, emotions cause people to make the wrong decisions. Maybe a psychopathic surgeon would be driven by the desire to be seen as great and does not care at all about the person on the operating table. But to be pragmatic, if they get the job done, who cares? Psychopaths are assertive. You can be assertive to the point of being overly confrontational and very obnoxious. But at the same time, there are times where you need that trait to stand up for yourself or for people you care about. Psychopaths don't procrastinate. They jump into things and don't suffer from anticipatory anxiety. They don't dip their toes in the water. They go for what they want. They focus on the positive. Psychopaths are very receptive to pleasure and don't really respond that much to punishment. The promise of a reward is much more of an incentive to act, and the threat of punishment or pain doesn't have a huge bearing on them. They don't take things personally. They don't beat themselves up, even if it's their fault. Many of us are terrified of making mistakes, and when we do, we become our own worst enemies. Being psychopathic is obviously bad, but having some of their traits in your toolbox to be used as and when the situation requires can be a very useful thing indeed, and may even be a lifesaver. I'd recommend checking out the book, The Wisdom of Psychopaths. I won't link it below because you can find your own potentially cheaper version. Also, and apologies to the author, I think there may be a free version floating around on YouTube. If you're a psychopath or on the psychopathic spectrum, I would love a cold, heartless subscribe.